Alright folks, today we're going to be talking about slopes of lines. Okay, so you might have out your cheat sheet handy because this equation for the slope of lines is on there under the linear section. Okay, but it's also on here today. We're going to be covering practice 3-4. So when we're talking about the line, okay, the slope graphically is the measure of the rise over the run between 2 points that are on your line. Okay, so our formula here looks like m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay, so we're going to look at these 2 points, 3, 2, and 5, 8. I have them graphed over here for you on a grid, but we're going to talk about them both algebraically and graphically. Okay, so if we're talking about this formula, the y2 and the y1, the x2 and x1, represent our two different ordered pairs. Okay, the first pair will get the subscript of the 1, the second pair the subscript of the 2. So 3, 2 we can call x1, y1, and our 5, 8 we can call x2, y2. So if we want to fill out this formula here, the y's are going to go on top. 2 minus 1, so that looks like 8 minus 2 for us. See this over here. And then on the bottom we've got x2 minus x1. For us that means 5 minus 3. Okay, but for any fraction we want to leave it as simple as possible. So 8 minus 2 we can call 6, 5 minus 3 is 2, and then last step we reduce. Notice it's 3 divided by 1. Instead of calling that just 3, we like seeing it as a fraction because that tells us what's happening on our graph. Okay, slope is also expressed as rise over run on an xy coordinate grid. Okay, so let's look to the right here and see what's going on graphically. Okay, the 2 points are plotted on our grid here. The slope is the rise, okay, and that's your up or your down. Okay, that talks about your y values, and that's why our y's were on top in our formula here. Okay, then our run is left or right movement, and that's talking about our x-axis movement, so that's why our x's are on the bottom there. Now, anytime you're counting the slope on a graph, we always start with the leftmost point. So that means we have to start at this 3, 2, and then get up to that 5, 8. So our rise is the vertical number that we need to go upwards here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then the run will be how much we need to move left to right. Okay, so then 1, 2. That's where our 6 over 2 comes from because we went up 6 and then right 2. Then, of course, that is 3 over 1. If you can see, if we start back here and just go up 3 instead, right 1, that point is a nice spot still on this same line. Okay, and the slope can be counted from any 2 points on the line. You just have to go left to right. Okay, so what we're going to do today is focus on practicing the algebraic form. This formula over here, y2 minus 1 over x2 minus x1, will be our best friend here. All right, but that's what slope is going to look like if we've got this kind of action going on. We also sometimes have something weird show up. Okay, so these next 2 parts we're going to talk about in your little table here is if 0 is included in this fraction. Okay, when we had our example here, we had nice numbers 6, 2. But if 0 shows up somewhere, we're going to have a little bit of an issue with our slope. Okay, so let's talk about our 2 options here. If 0 is in the numerator, remember it's numerator on top, denominator on the bottom. Okay, so if 0 is up top, I don't care what's on the bottom, it's going to reduce to 0. Okay, here's what I want you to do to prove this to yourself. Okay, go type in 0 divided by some number. So like 0 divided by 5 in your calculator. Okay, if I pick on this, we are saying here, no matter what, it better reduce to 0. So let's see what happens. Okay, so 0 divided by 5, it should be 0. Hit enter and it works out for us. Okay, so if the 0 is on top, we're okay, and it's just 0. Now, let's talk about what a 0 means on top graphically. Right? 0 on top means we have 0 rise. Okay, so between my 2 points, there's no rise. So over the right here, I've got this example. We're not going up any, but we're running some distance. Okay, this 5 was just some number, really could be any distance here, and that's going to look like a horizontal line. Okay, so that's what this part right here is. It says horizontal lines have a slope of 0. So if 0 is up top, it's a horizontal line. Okay, let's talk about when 0 is on the bottom. Okay, so we've got some number on top, 0 on the bottom. I'm going to use that 5 again. Okay, it says that we define the slope as undefined. Okay, well that's because we can't divide by 0. If you try that in your calculator and take 5 divided by 0, you should have some problems. Okay, it'll say error or maybe domain error. Okay, because we cannot do that. Okay, that's a no-go. See how it spells out no? If 0 is on the bottom, we have problems, so we have an undefined slope. Now 0 stands for our run here. It means I can go up 5, but I'm not going over any at all. That looks like our graph here. We went up 5, okay, but we didn't go right or left any. So undefined slope is going to be a vertical line up and down here. Okay, so if you don't know this already, make yourself a note. Horizontal lines, they go left to right, straight across. Vertical lines, they go up and down. Now, oblique line is a kind of a funny name here, okay, but oblique just means anything else. Okay, any other slope as a fraction, so any number can be on top or bottom, could be positive or negative, doesn't matter. Okay, and oblique lines just mean this slanty option here. Okay, it could increase from left to right or it could decrease from left to right. Those are just some examples of what oblique lines look like when you go ahead and graph them. The last thing we need to talk about is what it is to be an opposite reciprocal. Okay, so opposite just means the opposite sign. So if it was positive, it becomes negative. If it was negative, it becomes positive. Reciprocal means you take the fraction and you flip it over. Okay, so the top number goes to the bottom, and the bottom number goes to the top. Okay, so let's look at an example here. The fraction we started out with was 2/3. If we flip that over, the 3 goes up top and the 2 goes on the bottom. And then we started out with a positive 2/3, we switched it to a negative. Okay, another one over here. If we start out negative, it has to be positive, and then that 5 goes to the bottom, 3 goes to the top. Okay, notice that I had a negative only in one place. Now negatives can float. This means negative 5/3, but so does 5 over negative 3, and so does just next to the side negative 5/3. These all mean the same exact thing. Okay, so what that means, if you see a negative, the whole thing is positive. Okay, if you see a positive, the whole thing is negative, and you can put it wherever you want when you're doing the opposite reciprocal. Okay. So what we're going to do now is take a look at some examples where we're finding the slope between the 2 points. And then based on that number, what the fraction looks like will tell whether line will be horizontal, vertical, or oblique through those points. And then we're going to find the opposite reciprocal. Okay? Notice that the notation for part C has this big upside down T and the M. Remember, M is our symbol for slope. This upside down T, if you remember, means perpendicular. And we're going to talk about this a lot next time. Okay, but perpendicular lines will have opposite reciprocal slopes, and that's why we're practicing finding the opposite reciprocal here today. Alright, so we've got a formula here. We just want to go figure out which our x1, y1 and our x2, y2 are. Okay, so go ahead and label your points here, right above. And we just have to fill it in. So y2 was the number 4. Then we're going to subtract y1. So subtract 2, and then divide x2 minus x1, 0 minus a negative 1, so plus 1, and then simplify. Okay, we'll do the top and then the bottom. So 4 minus 2 is 2, 0 plus 1 is 1. Okay, once you have this, you want to just ask yourself if it can be reduced. So is there anything in common with the top and the bottom number? In this case, there's not. So 2 over 1 is our slope. Based off of that, we're going to say, is this horizontal, vertical, or oblique? Okay, remember, horizontal lines have a slope of 0. Vertical lines have a slope that's undefined. And oblique lines, anything else. Okay, so since there was no 0 involved anywhere in this fraction when we were done with it, this is our anything else. This is an oblique line. So then the opposite reciprocal, we had a positive, so we need a negative, and then just flip that fraction. So 1 over 2. Next one here, same concept. We need an x1, y1, x2, y2. And to fill out our formula, y's on top, so negative 7 minus 5. On the bottom, we've got our x's, 1 minus a negative 2, so 1 plus 2. And then simplify. Okay, we need to take negative 7 minus 5, negative 12, and 1 plus 2, which is 3. Now, again, we want to reduce, so we have to look, is there anything in common with the 12 and the 3? Okay, you can take a 3 out of each of those. If you divide 12 by 3, you've got 4. Got to get that negative on there. Divide 3 by 3, and you've got 1. So our reduced fraction is negative 4 over 1. Since that doesn't have a 0 in it, again, it's our anything else option. This is an oblique line. Last step here, the perpendicular slope, or the opposite reciprocal. We started out with a negative, so we need a positive, and then flip that fraction. 1 goes on the top, 4 goes on the bottom. Alright, we've got another one here. x1, y1, x2, y2, and then m equals. Y's go on top, so I've got a 3 minus 1. X is on bottom, 3 minus 0, and then simplify. 3 minus 1 is a positive 2. 3 minus 0 is a 3. 2 divided by 3. Okay, there's nothing that goes into both of those, so we just plop that down in part A. Part B, again, oblique, because there weren't zeros in anywhere. And lastly, we have to take the opposite reciprocal. Okay, so positive goes to a negative, 2/3 goes to a 3 over 2. Okay, let's look at some more here. We've got negative 5, negative 2, and 5, negative 4. Okay, so we want to go ahead and label those points, just like we did all those other ones. x1, y1, x2, y2. And then fill out our slope formula. Okay, so negative 4 minus a negative 2, so plus 2. And then 5 minus a negative 5, plus 5. Simplifying on the top, we've got negative 4 plus 2, or negative 2. On the bottom, we've got 5 plus 5 is 10. Now, this one can be reduced. See if you can figure out what this fraction will reduce to. Okay, we're taking a 2 out of each of those since they're even. So when you take a 2 out of negative 2, you've got negative 1. When you take a 2 out of 10, you get 5. So negative 1/5, an oblique line, and the opposite reciprocal. So we take that negative, make it positive, and flip that to a 5 over 1. Alright. On this next one, okay, we're going to label x1, y1 just like we did x2, y2. Okay, now if you'll notice, we have the same number appearing twice. Okay, let's see what happens in our formula when that type of thing happens. Okay, so m equals, on top we've got negative 3 minus a negative 2, so plus 2, divided by, and then 5 minus 5. Okay, up top we've got negative 3 plus 2, which is negative 1, divided by 5 minus 5, which is 0. Okay, this is one of those instances where 0 showed up in our fraction. Okay, so we have to decide, is 0 okay on the bottom, or is 0 a no-go on the bottom? Okay? So if you need help, if you don't remember, just type it in. Take negative 1 divided by 0 in your calculator. Okay, if it tells you a problem, it is a problem, that's because it is. That's not good. Okay, so if it doesn't give you a real number there, that means this slope is undefined. Now, to decide whether it is a horizontal or vertical line, because those are our two options when 0 is involved, think of it as rise over run. Okay, what kind of lines don't have any run, don't go left or right at all? Okay, well, if they don't run left or right, they have to go up and down, so this would be a vertical line. Now, what we're going to do for this perpendicular slope, the opposite reciprocal, we'll take this fraction and flip it over, take the opposite just like we did before, and see what happens here. Okay, opposite of a negative is positive, and then it's 0 divided by 1. Now 0 divided by 1 will actually work in your calculator. Okay, if you go actually type that in, you get a 0. Okay, if 0 is on the top, we're okay. And it just reduces to 0. So, anytime you are dealing with a slope that's undefined or 0, when you take the opposite reciprocal, all you have to do is flip between the two. So this one started out undefined, so it switched to 0. So then if it starts out as 0, you're going to switch it to undefined. But again, you're welcome to go ahead and write the fraction and see that that actually works there. All right, let's take a look at this next one here. We've got 9, negative 8, and 5, 12. So x1, y1, x2, y2, and fill out our formula. So 12 minus a negative 8 plus 8, and 5 minus 9. Okay, go ahead and simplify the top and the bottom there. We've got a 12 plus 8, which is 20, and a 5 minus 9. Alright, I want you to go ahead and reduce that, so pause the video while you do that if you need time. Hopefully you got that a 4 goes into each of those. Okay, so that reduces to a negative 5 over 1. Okay, notice I put that negative up top. Remember, negatives can float. It doesn't matter where you put that negative. It's just 1. The whole thing is negative. Okay, so that's our slope. And since there's not a 0 in there, we're going to call it oblique. And then flip that fraction, flip that sign. We've got a positive 1 divided by 5 for your perpendicular slope. Alright, go ahead and flip that page over. We've got a few more problems. Okay, what I would like you to do is pause the video while you work on each of these 3. Okay, you've got to make sure that you know what you're doing here so that when you do your homework, you're good to go. Okay, so pause the video, get those done, and then press play again, and we can check our answers here. Alright, let's chat about these now. Okay, for the first one, we got negative 10 over negative 2. That reduces to a positive 5. Again, we like to write it 5 divided by 1 so that we can see that rise over run action there. Okay, it is an oblique line because there weren't zeros. Opposite reciprocal becomes a negative 1 divided by 5. Now, number 8 was a little difficult because that 0 did show up. Okay, remember our 0, we're going to have horizontal or vertical, and then the slope is either going to be 0 or undefined. Those are our only 2 options. Okay, so you just have to decide, can you have a 0 on top? And you can, that's okay. So 0 divided by 10, if you type it in, if you can't remember, gives you 0, so that's what we write over here. Don't leave it as 0 divided by 10. Just like we can reduce this, 0 divided by 10 is 0. It's like trying to split 0 10 different ways. Well, if you have no money and try to give it to 10 people, you can do it, but they're not going to get anything. Okay, so you can divide it 10 ways. Everybody gets 0. So that works out for us. We got 0. Let's talk about why this line is horizontal. Again, think of it graphically. Rise over run. Okay, what this means is there's no rise up and down. Okay, the only lines that have no rise are ones that go left and right. That's a horizontal line there. Okay, then remember we talked about when you switch from 0, you go to undefined, just like when you switch from undefined, you go to 0. Okay, here's why. We're still taking the opposite reciprocal, so this was positive, becomes negative, and then 10 divided by 0. We can't divide 10 0 ways. Okay, you can't split it up like that. It doesn't work. Okay, so this one doesn't work. Again, if you type that in your calculator, you'll get an error. That tells you error means you write undefined. Okay, so we'll call it undefined slope there. Last one, we got a negative 5/3. You can put that negative wherever you want. It's oblique, and then that last one, when you take the opposite reciprocal, the negative goes away, and the fraction flips on over. Okay. Your homework will be 3-4. If you have any questions on it, okay, be sure to ask me.